Welcome to Acton in Focus. I'm Vivian Kopsinger-Birchall, your host, and my special guest is Ian Bergemann, the Community Conservation Specialist with the town of Acton. Ian, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's exciting to have you here, and especially talking about conservation. Much of our land is so beautiful. A lot of it is conservation, and maybe that's even a great place to start. How much of our land is conservation land?
Yeah, so it's definitely a hard question to sometimes answer, but we estimate around 2,000 acres in town is conservation land. People might say, "Whoa, I don't think I believe that number," and it's true that not all conservation land has trails. Some of it is just ecosystems that needed to be protected. That we thought, having a trail cut through here might actually take away from those ecosystem services. So
Right.
a lot of the wetlands you see in town on the side of roads, those are conservation land. They're just protected land in town.
Perhaps I jumped the line a little bit in terms of asking you about who you are. First, could you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the trails and who are you? How long have you been with the town, and what exactly do you do with the town?
Yeah, exactly. So my name, I came from Connecticut and graduated with my master's in environmental studies. And then I was able to get this awesome job at Acton. And I think about almost a little more than a year ago, I started in July. And really enjoying it, loving it. I have a lot of friends that came out with the same degree. We all went into very different fields, but I sort of said, I'll do anything I can to be outside. And I had such a great time with internships in college and some part-time jobs doing environmental education. So coming to Acton, I kind of brought that lens of, both let's make trails and public lands accessible. Let's make it open and welcoming for everybody. Let's make sure the trails exist and are maintained. But at the same time, let's educate people. Let's turn people's fears of nature into curiosity. And so that's always been something I've held very dear to my heart. I used to work a lot with children, and you get kids that see a crab and they're like, "Oh my goodness, that's terrifying." And then you talk to them a little bit about it, and 5 seconds later, they're looking at it with this awe. And so that's what I always try to bring whenever I'm engaging with people out in the woods.
It's so funny when you said kids look at it with awe. In my brain, I was like, okay, do they now want to have a pet crab or something like that? Asking their parents to buy them a crab. Anyway, but most importantly, you've talked about people's trying to encourage people to be in harmony with nature, to love nature, to be outside.
Yeah.
So back to Acton. You talked about trails earlier. How many trails do we have?
That's a tough number that I don't know off the top of my head. I do know that we have roughly, I think, 24 conservation lands with all their own trails. So if you can just imagine that. And most of our trails extend over a mile. So really, ends up being we probably have about plus 25 miles of trails. That does not include our regional trails like the Bruce Friedman and the Aspet River. But all of our woodland trails, we definitely have a lot of them.
And which ones are the most famous or
Most
popular?
famous. Everybody will know this, and I'll give it a short blurb, but the Acton Arboretum, it is the most popular destination in town, I would say. However, some good competitors would be like Nagog Hill. When I walk there, it reminds me very much of growing up in Connecticut. Rocky, lots of sloping hills that go towards the water, because you have the pond right there. Grassy Pond has an extremely long boardwalk that allows you the opportunity to walk through a marsh. Which you don't really always get because marshes are pretty muddy and you sink pretty quickly. But Grassy Pond's a great place like that. And of course, Weatherby Conservation Land just down the street from here along Route 2 is a great example of showing Acton's agricultural past. So it's hard to pick what my favorite is or what the best one and the most famous one is. But I think a lot of people in town would say, I've been to the Arboretum.
Well, many people usually go on the trails that are accessible, maybe closer to their homes. But for those who might be new to town,
Yeah.
how do they get information about the available trails in town?
Absolutely. So one of the first ways you can do it, if you feel like you can manage a computer at home and look this up, just go to actontrails.gov, and right there, as soon as you click on that page, there'll be a huge interactive map. You can click on that map and you can zoom in and out of all the trails in town. I also encourage people, come down to Town Hall. talk to me. I'm happy to print out maps for you. I'm happy to tell you my favorite trails. If you have a particular interest, if you want to go see meadows, I can tell you all the lands that have amazing meadows. If you want to go see birds, I can tell you the areas that other birders have told me are really good hotspots in town. So having that conversation always helps. But yeah, explore online, talk to people in town, and just head out your door and see what you find.
Well, if I wanted to go out camping, I know that Acton has one camping
Yes.
ground. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how to access it? What are the amenities or facilities that are on the camping ground?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have Camp Acton. It is a former Boy Scouting campsite. So they actually kept that tradition when it got handed over to the town. And so you can reserve a site. I don't believe I know the number off the top of my head because you do it through recreation. I don't remember how much it costs, but you can reserve through them.
I think $25.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so they can reserve through them, and then there's about 8 or so campsites there. The first campsite right by the parking lot is accessible for somebody with a wheelchair. So that we have boardwalk that has a ramp so you can access it. And then the rest of the campsites can get pretty rural. So there has the opportunity for fires at each campsite. We typically try to leave some logs available for people, and then every campsite has a picnic table. Very, very often we get the scouts returning every year, and it's a really good welcome because they really clean up the campsites for us, and they kind of make them a lot better than when they arrive. So that's one of the ways. And I say, you know, as the season's starting to get a little bit colder, you're probably going to start, if you didn't camp yet this year, the last 2 weeks maybe are going to be the time that you should try camping before it gets really, really cold.
I'm thinking about that. But anyway, back to the rest of our conservation land in Acton. Like, what is you mentioned ecosystems. You know, what are some of the I don't know, endangered species maybe in these conservation lands that you know of?
Yeah.
And, yeah.
We have one that's really famous, the wood turtle. So we've worked with Zoo New England to build wood turtle habitat this past February, actually, February, March. And we did this on the Neshoba Brook, kind of a little bit near, the Neshoba Brook kind of comes through Veterans Field and then comes all the way down to past Icehouse Pond and then into Concord. So along that whole corridor is habitat for these endangered species. So we do help try to build habitat. Years before I got hired, a scout had their project be creating a panel and nesting habitat. You can see that very well at Vets Field. And so that's just one of the species we have in town. We also, during February and March, during the first rain above 40 degrees, we do the amphibian brigade. So that's when we ask a bunch of residents and community members to come out and help us move salamanders and frogs across the road. I had my first ever time this year doing that. I did not know how big salamanders were. I mean, I love touching things and picking them up and looking at them. So it's a great night, a lot of fun, but you get to see a lot of really rare species during that night too.
And what are some of the, when you talked about the arboretum, people love going to the arboretum. What are some of the endangered species there? And actually not just endangered species. What are some of the habitat? Or what is that place a habitat for?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Arboretum is such a nice conservation land because it really captures all of it. You get, the forest there, you get the rocky outcroppings, you get these eskers that are a result of glacial past. You also get the upper grounds, which is sort of former orchards. So you can kind of get a lot of history there. You also get wetlands and you get some vernal pools. Those are all really, really important habitats. And a lot of them have species that are native. The Arboretum is really nice because it does capture non-native species. And there's a little bit of history to those, right? Some of those species that we have planting there are a good way to get people to understand that latitude lines along the globe are what really determine where things can live. So we have some species that do really well at the Arboretum because on the same latitude across the world, they're doing really well. So that's one of the cool things about that area. But you also get meadows there, and they built this wonderful new fish pond, Don's Pond, which has native species living inside of it. So maybe you go to Icehouse Pond, the water's a little murky, you can't see the fish. You can go to Don's Pond and you can see a lot of the fish that you would see in all the other parts of water in Massachusetts.
I love Don's Pond. It's very relaxing.
Yes, yeah, it's relaxing, and it's really just a gem of allowing people who maybe don't have the opportunity to see aquatic life really up close. You can go there, see bullfrogs, you see fish, you see tadpoles, you see snails, and I'm sure there's probably a hare in there every other day.
Yeah, so what are some of the activities or events that you have that community can engage with in terms of conservation land or connecting with conservation land?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a couple of collaborations with some other groups in town. I mentioned before, like with Zoo New England, we grabbed volunteers from town to help out with that. This past summer, we did 2 water chestnut polls at Icehouse Pond, and I believe there's a video you can check out online about that. And that's just sort of a partnership we do with OARS, which is a group that helps monitor the Suazco watershed, so the Sudbury-Concord Assabet Rivers watershed. We also partner with ACT, the Acton Conservation Trust, and we lead weekly walks. So we try to go to every conservation land and walk about a mile. And I attend those as I can and try to provide some nature information about it. In addition to that, we're always hosting different volunteer opportunities just to help us clean up trails, remove invasive species. In the spring, we're hoping to launch a really formal education program that will involve workshops, lectures, potentially some trivia nights. All these things are just to encourage people to familiarize themselves with the native species around them, and also, again, flip that fear of the unknown to curiosity of the unknown.
That sounds very exciting, which brings me to the next question. Like, when you're looking out for volunteers, is there a particular age group you're looking at?
Honestly, we'll take everybody we can get. You know, Icehouse Pond this July, we had somebody as young as 2 years old.
Oh, nice.
You know, of course, I was like, please keep an eye on them.
I know.
You know, I won't be. But so, you know, we try to pull from really any age group. We traditionally get a lot of retirees with us. So it's always great to bring in some younger folks or some folks from different backgrounds. Because at the end of the day, I would love to hear why you love nature or why you're cautious about nature. Because then I can work with you and I can work with different community members to really say, like, what connects you to nature?
Right.
Is it walking in the woods and is it the quietness? Or is it you're looking for this specific bird, right? So any kind of way I can connect with people. So we're always looking for all different kinds of people. If somebody wants to volunteer and there's just not an opportunity they're seeing out there, please just reach out to me. You can email conservation@actonma.gov and you'll get a response from me pretty quick.
Well, you've talked about all the fun things, but I gotta ask this question. What are some of the challenges with working with conservation land here in Acton?
Yeah, so a challenge that I think everybody in this world is facing is climate change. We are seeing changes in our ecosystems. We are seeing stressors happening. They're impacting not just the species themselves, but also the way we access the woods. Trails are being washed out more than ever now. We're experiencing flooding from these torrential downpours. In addition to that, things that normally would happen with the natural cycle of having snow build up, and the snow actually ends up helping out the vernal pools. Without having snow, vernal pools are not able to get that snow melt that would actually fill them up, and that would allow for amphibians to spawn. So we're certainly seeing changes. Trees are getting stressed out. There are new diseases that are being introduced to our trees that we've never seen before. There's currently a beech disease for the type of tree. You know, it goes along with the ash borers and the other diseases that we're seeing. So that's really our biggest challenge. And it's caused us to take a different approach of being a lot more active with our management styles.
So I got to ask this because public health is one of my passions, or community health. And so when you're looking at or seeing this emergence of new disease, are you at any point concerned of zoonotic diseases or the emergence of them?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, what's nice about some of the disease that we get involved with vegetation is that we know that they're not going to spread too bad, but there is the other aspect of, you know, this year we had triple E was a real problem. And we do have vernal pools and we do have wetlands and they do amazing ecosystem services and there's a lot of life inside those. However, at the same time, these mosquito-borne illnesses do pose a very big threat. And it's hard for us to say, go out in the woods and enjoy yourselves, but don't get bit by a mosquito. You know, so having to really balance the caution with the really advocating for people to be outside. And on that same thing with public health, we know for a fact that access to green spaces makes people feel calmer and more peaceful and reduces stress. So trying to educate more people and really, I totally understand if you're scared to go outside because you heard that there's bears out there, you heard that there's mosquitoes out there. I totally understand, and maybe it's just going out with a guide is going to get you out that door.
Right.
And hopefully you can feel the peacefulness, you can really feel the relaxation.
Right.
But the environment goes hand in hand with public health.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I have been advocating for, and I will continue advocating for, especially for new people coming into our towns, in our state, who don't know the diseases that are born out of, say, weather changes. I think one thing I haven't seen is care packages or welcome packages that include that kind of information. And since you're in conservation, I would like to pitch it to you and to everyone really who works with the town to kind of provide that service where we have, okay, in the spring, watch out for ticks, and translate that in languages that newcomers will understand. So because as we're encouraging people to go embrace nature, they need to be fully equipped with how to safely enjoy nature.
Yes.
So I guess I just wanted to pitch that.
Yeah, and I appreciate it, and really we do. I think prior to me getting hired, COVID kind of opened up this whole new door of people going outside because there was no other place to go.
Right.
So all of our kiosks do have, and I'll say it, they do have only English versions of warnings about ticks.
Yep.
So it's absolutely true that we need to include other languages, and we need to include more information. This year was the first time that we started posting about mosquitoes on our kiosks. Before, it just wasn't something that was coming up and being a priority. So I think absolutely that's true, that we need to let people know that nature is its own beast, and it should be respected. And by doing that, you have to also prepare yourself.
Happy to collaborate to work on that because it's something I'm passionate about.
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank
Sharing
you very
information, that will save people's lives. But yeah, going back again to, I guess, I know I have kept you long, and we'll probably have many of these. I plan, or we'll work together to go out on site and cover, walk some of these trails together with a camera so people can actually see all the beautiful places that you're talking about, and we can plan that over the coming months.
Yes, please.
But I guess to wrap it up in a way, are there things we don't know as a community about Acton's conservation lands that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people don't think about or are aware of is that we have some really big regional trails that go through our area, like the Bay Circuit Trail. That is a huge trail that actually forms an entire loop around Boston. So it's definitely, I think, something that we don't advertise too often, but that's an awesome trail people should go visit. I think also a lot of people might stick to the trails behind their houses, but I would really encourage them to go out and explore the other areas. Acton has such beautiful wildlife that changes with the seasons. Coming from Connecticut, I don't really see snow too much.
Lucky you.
Yeah, especially coastal Connecticut. And salt water really changed the landscape there. But up here, you have so many diverse environments that exist in little niches. So I would say, hey, yeah, go to the Arboretum maybe in the spring. See the wildflowers, they're gorgeous. But after that, in the high summer, go to Jenks and check out the meadows because you're going to see an entirely different ecosystem. And then by the fall right now, go visit our lands like Guggins Brook. You can see the red maples really flourishing. It's a huge wetland area. The water's pretty low right now. So I would just say, like, for a lot of people, I think they only go certain places and they only go during certain seasons.
Guggins Brook? I've heard that for the first time.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Where is that?
Guggins Brook it's conveniently located right near the Acton Water District office.
Oh, that place.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a little bit of access. There's a parking lot over there off of 111, and then you could also access it from like Idlewide, kind of coming in from there and coming from Jenks. You could also access it from Wright Hill Conservation Land.
Oh my goodness.
So that's something I think people also don't realize is that a lot of our conservation lands, we try our best to make them connect.
Right.
And if they don't connect, we work really well with community members that have property in between, and we see if we can get some permission to allow our trails to go through there.
Right. I guess one final question is, how does the town determine what becomes conservation land?
Yeah, that's a big question. I've only been here a year, so I'm learning, but I think a lot of it has to do with the intent to purchase or the intent for a gift. So this past town meeting, we did receive a gift of a property on Piper Road that this individual wanted to make sure it would be conservation land. And now that adds to Great Hill Conservation Land, one of our largest conservation lands in town. And so that just adds, the opportunity for more trail access or just protecting some important ecosystems. But with other areas too, when we go to purchase them, if we use a grant, sometimes that grant will say, hey, this has to be conservation land only. And so we would abide by that grant. But a lot of times when we look at whether or not this land should become conservation land, our open space and recreation plan has a parcelization priority list. Hard one. That kind of helps us determine what lands in town, are abutting conservation land, and so those are priorities, or what lands in town already have a certain level of protection, and we want to keep that protection. So some of that is like this Chapter 61 land in town, that has a degree of protection, and so that's also a priority. And then other lands in town that are just really, really big, that have great ecosystems or connection. Those are the ways that we sometimes identify them. But a lot of times it comes from the community. If the community sees it and demands it, we'll try to act on it.
Yeah, because I was curious, because I was wondering whether part of conservation land can be used for commercial purposes if needed, in a way that still maintains the conservation nature of it.
Yeah, and I think in Massachusetts, they've really written the law so that can't happen. You can at some point, and I don't know the top of my head, but you can get I think it's like 2/3 of the legislator to essentially vote to overturn a conservation land's use to municipal or to commercial. So it's really, really hard. It is possible. And then there's other things that exist, like conservation restrictions that then have like protection for their entire life. So there are very different ways that we can work with sustainable development. And obviously, there is a housing crisis. There are resources that we need to use. I was
trying not to go there, but that's kind of what I was looking at.
It absolutely needs to exist. In college, that's what they were trying to teach us now.
Right.
We're turning the page and we're talking about, just as much as it is to preserve and conserve land, it is also important to make sure that there are resources for everybody. It is not fair if only a select few get to access the woods because they can afford to. People should be able to access nature all the time, regardless of whether or not they can, live or afford to live near it. And so that's why it's very big for me to think that, our conservation lands, not all of them have parking lots. And I've just started living in Massachusetts, but I've had to park on sides of roads and on neighborhoods and to go into a land and go hiking, and it feels a little uncomfortable because you don't really know where to put your car. So that's why it's really important to me that all of our conservation lands have parking so people can get to them or they can walk to them. But at that same tone, it's very important to balance this.
Yep.
We do need to have resources for today, for tomorrow, and for future generations. At the same time, we are just as entitled to resources as all of the other things of nature. So just as much as the animals and plants, we belong to that group too.
I'm glad that you have the holistic view and holistic perspective of how all these work.
And I think it's the only way it works, right? A holistic view, you don't walk into somebody's house and say, your bathroom's dirty, this is a dirty house. No, you walk in, you say, okay, this bathroom could use a little cleaning, but the rest of the house looks gorgeous. So I think it's really important that we look at things, it's good to categorize things, but it's also good to understand that there's a whole system and a whole cycle to nature that we are just starting to really understand.
Absolutely. And with that, I want to say, as we wrap up, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to tell our viewers?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of topics, but I would say please pay attention to social media the next coming months. Stop by the Conservation Office. We will definitely have flyers up. There's a lot of programming that we're going to be launching in the spring that the town hasn't done before. And obviously a lot of collaborations, and there's a lot of talk about looking at invasive species a little more closely. And just this past year, I cooked garlic mustard pesto.
Oh, wow.
It was spicy, but it was good. So, I think bringing a lot more education to the town is going to happen a lot sooner than I expected. So really be on the lookout for that. And also, if you want to volunteer, if you are just curious about nature, just come by and talk to me. Obviously, I can talk for a while about nature and everything, so I'm more than happy to share stories with everybody.
I'm so excited, and yes, you can count on me for the collaborations. I mean, with anything to do with outreach, looking at species more closely, I'm happy to come there, be with the camera, and may ask questions that people out in the public might have as well. So I'm excited about this, and I look forward to collaborating. But thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much.
For your time, for telling us about our conservation lands, and thanks for the work that you do for the town. And to our viewers, I hope you've learned a little bit more about our conservation land. You can learn more about trails from the website that Ian provided, and you can also visit the Town of Acton's website, actonma.gov. But for now, thank you for watching. Till next time.